Hi, everyone. My name is Danny Anzueta. I'm the Associate Director of Recruitment Engagement and Volunteerism. I'm happy to welcome you to the next installment of our virtual unconference for emerging professionals. I'm happy to welcome Lee Burdett Williams, our Senior Director for Mental Health Initiatives on the College Autism Network, who presents to us today. Lee, thanks so much for joining us. The stage is yours.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to talk a little bit about students with autism on campus and why the College Autism Network even exists. I think autism is a term that has become a lot more well known in sort of popular culture. A number of people know someone with autism. They might even have that diagnosis themselves. And so, you know, what that of course has meant is that we see a lot more references to autism in TV shows and in movies and in books. If you've watched any of these shows, you've watched a show with a character who has either a formal diagnosis of autism or has some of the characteristics that I'll talk a little bit about. This show in particular is in its third season, and it's about a teenager with autism who was in high school, and in this third season he goes to college. And I think as these TV shows go, Atypical is really great at portraying what students face when they make that transition from high school, where they've had a lot of support and connection, to college, where there's much more burden on them to be responsible for themselves. And when I'm talking about autism, I'm talking about something called autism spectrum disorder, which is a kind of a broad umbrella term for a number of different sort of subdiagnoses. And autism itself is this really broad spectrum of ability. And at kind of at the low end are people with significant intellectual disabilities, people who are nonverbal, who couldn't probably live independently in any setting, and they have that diagnosis of autism. But they share that diagnosis with people at the other end of the continuum who might be extremely bright or, above average intelligence, certainly capable of doing college-level academic work. And so that group is typically called high-functioning autistic, and a synonym for that is Asperger syndrome. This is a term that is technically not the right term, but a lot of people use it. A lot of people with autism claim the label of Asperger or Aspie. And so that's when we're talking about college students with autism, we're typically talking about people with high functioning autism. So this question is, is it a disability? And the truth is that there are a lot of people out there who meet one or more of the criteria, the diagnostic criteria for autism spectrum disorder. And I'll talk about those criteria in a moment. And those folks live and learn and work without formal accommodations. They might have a pretty successful career. They might have a family. They have friends. They have activities that they're interested in. They might live independently. And they're not disabled in any sort of sense of the word. So I think it's important to say that, to make the distinction, that autism characteristics are a problem when they impede a person from achieving their goals, or if they disrupt others in a way that impedes their pursuit of their goals. And that's when autism shifts from being a difference to being a disability. So if somebody has, for instance, the goal of going to college and graduating so they can get the job that they're really excited about, that goal could be impeded if the characteristics of autism get in the way of any of those things happening. If they can't succeed in school because of that, then we're looking at a disability. But plenty of people have that goal of graduating from college and going into the workforce, and their autism really doesn't impede them greatly. So what is autism spectrum disorder? Autism generally refers to a developmental disorder and I use that term kind of loosely, it's most commonly characterized by traits that affect social interactions, language, behavior. It's a set of adaptive responses to the way the world, to the way the brain sees the world. And that's a really important concept to grasp here. Our brains all day, every day, are telling us how to adapt to our environment. So if you walk into like a movie theater, back in the old days when we went to movies, and it's really cold in that room, you might pull your sweatshirt on. But if you walk into, say, a classroom and it's really pretty warm, you might take the sweatshirt off. And those are adaptive responses to your environment. And it's your brain telling you to do one thing or the other. And what's interesting is that the person next to you might have a very different adaptive response to that same environment. And that's because your brains are wired differently. So it's really critical to understand that it's our brain wiring that determines our response to the environment, right? And it's hardwired. And our brain wiring is not a moral choice. So our brain wiring, for instance, dictates whether you're right-handed or you're left-handed. You don't get a choice in that. You're one or the other. And if you're right-handed and I ask you to write your name with your left hand, you'd be able to do it, but it would be hard and you wouldn't do it very well. So that's what happens when your brain is wired in a particular way and you're asked to behave or respond in a way that's different. So the common characteristics of autism, they're not moral failings. It really is just this brain wiring, and we don't really have a way to change the way that someone's brain is wired. I want to show you a quick video. It's about 5 minutes, and this guy is going to tell you about some of the traits, common traits of Asperger's, or Asperger's as he calls it. If you have any trouble hearing this, it is closed captioned, so you'll be able to read along. Okay.
Hi, I'm Dan, I'm 26 years old and I have Asperger's syndrome, and these are my top 10 Asperger traits that you may find helpful. Number 1, sometimes when I'm nervous or concentrate, I flick my fingers and I don't even know I'm doing it, but my girlfriend seems to notice quite quickly like that, just to soothe, and it helps me concentrate, and I normally get it when I'm quite nervous around other people. Number 2, for me, is change in routine. So if I've got something in my head that we're going to do or I'm going to do, and something comes in the way of it, I get really upset and nervous if you know, it's challenged. Like if we're in a sandwich shop and we're going to buy sandwiches and the bread I want isn't in, I get really nervous and then I start to panic because I don't know what I'm going to do, because I don't know what bread is available and other things like that. So this can become a problem for me, and I guess routines are quite comfortable to me in everything I do. Foods are really important to me, as in I like eating maybe a small selection of foods. I don't like anything with any sauces or anything. I can't have the sauce texture in my mouth. But if I do have sauce like gravy, it's got to be warm. I can't have anything cold, and I can't eat food if it's being cooled down, like pizza. If it goes cold, I can't eat that. And I like quite bland things like sandwiches with no butter on it and just literally just chicken and lettuce maybe. And I could eat the same thing over and over again forever. I mean, I could eat Sunday dinner, like roast vegetables and things forever. Smells are quite a bad thing, and some certain smells make me really annoyed, and then I start to panic, or I feel sick, and I get nervous and I don't know what to do. So depending on what it is, it's not every smell. It's just certain smells that are really potent and it goes straight to my head and I just can't deal with it. I guess this is to do with hypersensitivity in people with Asperger's. Number 5, certain noises and sounds can really affect me. Only sometimes, only certain noises and certain sounds, and it's really sharp and it goes right into my brain. I can't concentrate and I get really annoyed, super annoyed. Sometimes I just kind of lash out in anger because that noise annoys me so much. I can't deal with anything else. Like everything gets shut down just because that noise pierces everything. Number 6, A lot of people with Asperger's syndrome tend to get quite involved in a certain topic of interest, and for me this is definitely true, and I have a topic of interest with social, economic and global economic issues involving conspiracy theories and UFOs, and I know everything there is to know about it in great detail, and I can remember everything that I read about it. Number 7. Wearing the same type of clothing all the time, I kind of get into comfortable patterns of wearing the same thing all the time, and so my girlfriend kind of helps me pick out different things sometimes to spicing up my clothes line, but I tend to just fall into a routine of just wearing maybe like 3 t-shirts in routine, so that's quite important to people with Asperger's syndrome as routine, and I guess I get really comfortable wearing the same clothing. Number 8. Is sarcasm, and I feel that this is a common thing with people with Asperger's syndrome. Is I don't get sarcasm with strangers or people I don't know that well. The only time I really do get sarcasm is if I know the person quite well. If I don't know them, then it's hard to pick up when they're joking or if they're being serious. This can become a problem, especially if you're in work or a professional environment. So I do have difficulties with this, and I'm sure a lot of you guys will as well. Number 9 is crowded places and busy public places. I'm not a massive fan. I can't deal with myself in big cities. I get very scared and nervous, and I tend to just shut down. It's just quite ironic as well, because I play music in a band and I love playing gigs and I love playing to big audiences. But if it was the other way around, if I was in the audience watching myself, it's a different scenario, and I can't deal with it with a lot of people around me all the time. It's kind of overload again, and I get really, really scared and have to kind of retreat back to somewhere that I feel comfortable with. And number 10, last but not least, a lot of people think or tell me that I talk too fast. Right now I'm actually trying to talk quite precise and slower than I usually do, but when I get going on a topic of interest or a specific area that I know a lot about, I tend to kind of speed up and talk quite fast, and I guess it's because my brain's running really, really fast and I'm trying to get a lot of information out at any one time, and I guess people don't understand that, and they kind of always tell me to slow down. It gets really frustrating because I don't want to slow down because I'm going to lose what I'm trying to do, but at the same time I guess they can't understand what I'm saying. So this is a big problem, and I don't know many other people with Asperger's syndrome, so I don't know if this is a common thing, but this is definitely something that affects me. So thank you for watching my video. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be doing more videos on Asperger's syndrome and anything that I can do to help. If you want to get in touch, email me below, and thanks guys, stay tuned.
So I'm hoping the sound came through. We did test it, but I know how these things go. So if you can take a look at, this is Dan's list, and if you look at these and think about somebody on a college campus, are there any of these that really stand out for you that you think make it really difficult for someone to be successful in college? When I look at this list, some of the ones that stand out for me are that change in routine. If change in routine is really hard for you, then college is like a nightmare, because it's all about changes in routine. Having a roommate is a walking change in routine. Not getting sarcasm is really a problem for college students. I think it's like the native language of college students, sarcasm. And sarcasm is hard for people with autism, because people with autism tend to be very literal thinkers and listeners, and so they are very concrete. If you say something to them, they just take it at face value. And sarcasm is basically saying the opposite of what you mean, right? So your dad comes into the room, you look at him, you go, "Nice sweater, Dad," right? And you kind of roll your eyes, and your dad knows that even though you said nice sweater, you don't mean that, you mean the opposite. So if you're really literal in your interpretation of the way that people talk to you, sarcasm is hard. And people with autism, like Dan in the video, he doesn't tolerate crowds well. So think about like any major orientation activity, and that's really what it is. Now, these 10 things are not not every person with autism has all of these characteristics, but they usually have many of them. So they come to college because the support for children with autism, starting like in pre-K all the way up to high school, those supports and interventions have really improved over the years. And so college becomes much more of a realistic opportunity for intelligent people with autism. And so they come to college, and what they find is a very different set of rules that govern what the institution is required to provide. So the estimates of how many people with autism are going to college is a really wide range. Like, kind of, that's sort of a useless statistic right there, because it's hard to count. Like, are we talking about people with a formal diagnosis who've registered with their disabilities office, or a formal diagnosis but have never gone through disability services? People who meet the criteria but don't have a formal diagnosis? It's hard to know. But what we do know is that about a third of the students with a diagnosis of autism graduate, and that's way lower than it should be given their academic ability. And we know that colleges do a range of things, ranging from nothing to comprehensive programs. And so this kind of shows you, like, on the low end, schools provide really nothing, or they just deal with a problem if it comes up. Some provide limited support through their disability services office. Some schools provide access to more intensive support, like maybe a special coach that will work with you, or an advising group. And these often come with a special fee charged to the student because it requires more staff time. And some schools kind of go all out, and they have created these programs that are specifically for students with autism. And that's where the College Autism Network comes in. So CAN was started in 2014 by a professor, Brad Cox, who's a professor of higher ed at Florida State. When his son was diagnosed at the age of 6 with autism, Brad realized that he and his wife could do all sorts of things to help Logan be better prepared for college, but unless colleges and universities did their part, he wasn't going to be successful. And so Brad was really motivated to help colleges get better at this. And in 2016, it became a nonprofit, and then this past January was acquired by NASPA in order to kind of build it even further. It's got 3 focus areas: research about students with autism, training for faculty, staff, and students to support students with autism, and advocacy on behalf of students with autism. And so what we do, this is primarily my work, but a number of other folks do it as well. We provide a lot of training, workshops and presentations and webinars to student affairs professionals, faculty, and peer leaders on autism and how to support students with autism. And then the other part of our work is helping to build a network of these programs that I mentioned. There's about 100 at least, and then there are others that are kind of partial, and helping them communicate with one another and learn from one another is part of CAN's work. That's our website, and I encourage you to take a look if you're interested in learning more about what we do or learning more about autism on campus. Visit our website and you'll see a lot of resources, presentations, articles. And lastly, I'll just say that to be an autism-friendly campus, it's important that you recognize that you've got students and staff and faculty who are autistic or share some of those characteristics. So recognition is critical. An autism-friendly campus doesn't rely on the disability services staff to do all the work. They recognize that it's everybody's responsibility to support students with autism. It's critical that staff and faculty and students learn about autism, and then when they learn about the characteristics, they recognize how the environment sometimes impedes somebody's goals to be successful. And so changing that environment, addressing those differences is really important. And I think lastly, celebrating all kinds of diversity, including neurodiversity. People with autism, people who are neurodiverse, when they think and they act differently, they enrich a campus. And we know that about diversity in general, so we certainly can recognize that about neurodiversity. And with that, I will say thanks, and I'm happy to stop sharing my screen and see if anyone has any questions or comments that I can be helpful with.
Well, that was great, Lee. Thank you so much for that presentation. If anyone that's joined us has any questions, please feel free. You can either unmute yourself and ask directly, or include it in the chat, and we'll get them over to Lee.
Yep.
I think, Lee, for myself, in the work that you've been doing, what have you seen as some trends and transitions that have happened over the past few years, and how higher education is being more responsive to the needs of students with autism?
Well, I think people on campuses realize that this is a population that is growing in the general population, and so institutions that want to recruit smart, interesting students have started to figure out how to get better at speaking the language of autism to families and students. So we're seeing more active recruitment, and I think that we're seeing more services and programs develop on campus as retention strategies. This is a population of students who have overcome a lot to be successful academically. If you think about what it would be like for you to go to a country where you didn't speak the language and then try to succeed in school, that's kind of what it's like for people with autism. And I think we're realizing that if we can make some changes to our approach, that their retention rate will be higher. And so better recruitment and better retention motivate schools to invest resources. And so we're seeing more and more of that happening.
That's very helpful. What are some of the resources that you think colleges and universities need to have in place in order to ensure that students are able to succeed?
Well, I think it's important to recognize the difference between what I call capital A accommodations and small a accommodations, right? A capital A accommodation is what the Disability Services Office puts in writing, extended time on tests, distraction-free environment, and then the student takes that document to the professor and says, here are my accommodations, right? And I think that we're getting better at that. I think it's the small a accommodations, and those are things that that are really about recognizing that someone you work with or in a classroom, maybe someone that you teach or learn alongside, is struggling with what's happening in that setting because their brain is not wired to respond well in that kind of situation. So, for instance, Dan in the video, he said that he's nervous in with like loud noises really physically hurt him. They don't just annoy him, and so you can imagine a classroom that's next to a classroom where they show movies all the time, and that sort of constant ambient noise that doesn't bother most of the people in the room, but like the person with autism is going to be so distracted and uncomfortable. And so it requires, a professor saying to everybody, is everyone okay? Let's see if we can't get them to turn that down. Like, that's a small a accommodation. And that's the sort of thing that just comes from an awareness of how people are experiencing the environment. I think that some faculty are really good at that. Like, they won't assign group work without really thinking it through, because working in a small group is really difficult for people with autism sometimes, because they're not as comfortable in those social settings.
Helpful. So we have a question in the chat that came through.
Yeah.
How can student affairs pros and grads diagnosed with autism work together to navigate the field? Yeah,
it's a great question. I think one of the most important things is to be open about the diagnosis and not to feel any kind of shame or discomfort in saying, I have autism, here's what it means, here's how you're going to see me present and interact in your class, or in your residence hall. And, if you've ever watched the show Atypical, that's sort of me. Or if you've ever, if you know who Sheldon is on The Big Bang Theory, that's kind of what I'm like. And so I think if we can get people past feeling any kind of shame or discomfort at acknowledging it, that's when it really starts to make a difference for other people. And then when they see that people with autism are comfortable in that setting, they become more comfortable themselves. And I think in student affairs, it's hard because there's, we place such a high premium on social interaction, and people with autism aren't always comfortable in those sort of social settings. So I think we student affairs professionals, we have to be more open to our colleagues when they're not good at being, really gregarious and comfortable in a large group. And I think NASPA members can work best with the network by helping encourage schools to invite us to do presentations, to attending our sessions when we're presenting at annual or regional conference, and encouraging people to really educate themselves. And if you just go online and Google autism in college, you'll find all sorts of really great TED Talks, and make a commitment once a month to learn something new about autism. And over time, it's really going to make a difference. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, things that you've learned that you're like, if I could leave one thing, this is the most critical thing you need to know about either the network, the students that you work with, the field?
Mm-hmm. This is not my background. I'm a pretty traditional student affairs professional. I worked in res life and student activities, and worked my way up to be a VP for student affairs. And I kind of backed into this as an area of work because I was seeing so many students on my campus who were really challenged socially and in classes, and I started to learn more about this diagnosis of autism and this label. And I think if I can offer one thing, it's just that you don't have to go get a degree in special education. You don't have to be an expert to really make a difference. You just have to be open to learning and then encouraging people to share their experiences. And I think that makes a huge difference. It's not that hard to become more empathetic with people who are challenged if you just kind of try and put yourself in their shoes and see the campus through their eyes.
That's fantastic. And I think, an additional resource that we have for NASPA members is our disability knowledge community as a space for you to engage and connect with people who work either in disability resource centers or have, as Lee said, a passion for the work and have found ways to connect to it. So it's an additional resource that's available for everyone if you're interested in getting connected and engaged with this kind of work. Lee, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really grateful to have you with us today and sharing more about the College Autism Network.
No, it's my pleasure. It's good to see you all and sort of see your names at least. And I hope the rest of the day goes well. Thanks again, Danny, for asking.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Take care.
And now I'd love to welcome Kirby